The sun streamed through the stained glass windows of Grand Cathedral, casting rainbow patterns across the marble floor. David Chen stood at the altar, his heart beating with excitement beneath his perfectly tailored tuxedo. At 45, he had finally found what he believed was true happiness. His tech company had made him billions, but today wasn't about money, it was about love. His bride-to-be, Sofia Martinez, looked breathtaking as she walked down the aisle. Her white dress sparkled with tiny crystals, and her dark eyes shone with joy. The guests, a mix of Silicon Valley elite and family members, watched in admiration. David could hardly believe that this accomplished art curator had chosen to share her life with him. The priest had just begun the ceremony when the heavy wooden doors at the back of the church creaked open. At first, David barely noticed, too lost in Sofia's eyes. But then came the whispers, spreading through the crowd like ripples in a pond. Something was wrong. A teenage boy walked down the aisle, his steps hesitant but determined. Behind him was a woman David hadn't seen in 20 years. His heart stopped. Mei Wang, his college sweetheart, the one who disappeared without a trace during their final year at Stanford. The boy couldn't have been more than 17. He had David's nose, his jaw, and most strikingly, his eyes. The same eyes that stared back at David every morning in the mirror. The church fell silent, the kind of silence that screams louder than words. "I'm sorry," May said, her voice carrying through the hushed cathedral. "But he deserved to know his father before." She paused, swallowing hard. "Before it's too late." Sophia's hand slipped from David's grasp. He could feel her questioning gaze, but he couldn't look away from the boy, his son, a son he never knew existed. The wedding guests began to murmur. Phones appeared, capturing the moment that would soon make headlines across the globe. David's mother, seated in the front row, clutched her pearl necklace so tight it might snap. His younger sister reached for her hand, trying to steady her. The boy, David didn't even know his name yet, stood there, hands stuffed in his suit pockets, looking both defiant and terrified. Just like David had looked at that age when he was pitching his first tech idea to investors. "My name is Kevin," the boy finally said, his voice cracking slightly. "And I think you're my dad." David's world tilted on its axis. 20 years of memories crashed through his mind, late nights coding with Mai by his side, their dreams of changing the world, the morning he woke up to find her gone. No note, no explanation, just emptiness. Sophia stepped forward, her wedding dress rustling against the carpet. Instead of anger, her face showed something more complex: concern, confusion, and surprisingly, compassion. She had always been the level-headed one in their relationship. "Perhaps," she said softly, "we should all talk somewhere more private." But privacy was a luxury they no longer had. Through the cathedral's windows, camera flashes were already visible. News traveled fast in Silicon Valley, and a tech billionaire's secret son showing up at his wedding. That was the kind of story that would spread faster than a viral tweet. David looked at Kevin again, seeing pieces of himself reflected back. The way the boy stood, slightly slouched but trying to appear confident. The nervous habit of running his hand through his hair. How had he not known? How had he missed 17 years of this child's life? Mai stepped closer, and David could see what she hadn't said earlier. The slight yellowing of her skin, the careful way she moved, the shadow in her eyes that spoke of borrowed time. She wasn't just here to reveal a secret, she was here to ensure her son's future. As security guards began to clear the church, David made a decision. He turned to Sophia, apology written across his face, then looked back at his newly discovered son. Sometimes life's biggest moments come disguised as its worst disasters. This wasn't the wedding day he had planned, but it might be the most important day of his life. "Kevin," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them, "I think we have a lot to talk about." The world as David knew it had just shattered. But among the broken pieces, he could see something new taking shape, something unexpected, terrifying, and possibly wonderful. His perfectly planned life had just turned upside down, but maybe, just maybe, it had turned right side up for the first time. The private room at the Street Regency Hotel felt too small for the weight of 20 years of secrets. David sat across from May, while Kevin perched uncertainly on a chair between them. Sophia had graciously given them space, saying she needed time to think. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the plush carpet as memories flooded back. You remember that coffee shop near campus? May's voice was softer now, different from the strong tone she'd used in the church. The one where we used to study until midnight. David nodded, his throat tight. Been there, done that. They had those terrible puns written on their chalkboard. Kevin looked between them, soaking in every detail about his parents' past. His fingers drummed nervously on his knee. Another gesture so like David's that it made his chest ache. That's where I found out I was pregnant, May continued, her hands wrapped around an untouched cup of tea. I had such big dreams then. We both did. You were already working on your first app, staying up all night, talking about changing the world. The memories washed over David like waves. Those endless nights of coding, May bringing him coffee, both of them dreaming of success. He'd been so focused, so driven. Had he missed signs? Had she tried to tell him? Why didn't you tell me? The question came out more gently than he expected. 20 years ago, it would have been angry, demanding. Now it was just sad. Mai looked out the window at the San Francisco skyline that had changed so much since their college days. You got the call that morning, remember? The venture capitalist who wanted to fund your startup. You were so excited, talking about moving to Silicon Valley, working 20-hour days. She paused, wiping a tear. I knew if I told you, you'd give it all up. You'd choose us. Shouldn't that have been my choice to make? David asked, leaning forward. Kevin spoke up for the first time since they'd left the church. Mom always said you were meant to do important things. She showed me articles about your company, how your technology helps people. His voice was steady, but his hands were shaking slightly. She made sure I knew you weren't just some guy who abandoned us. You were someone who never knew about me. David felt tears prick at his eyes. While he'd been building his empire, May had been building their son's character, making sure Kevin didn't grow up bitter or resentful. I had a good life, Kevin added quickly. Mom made sure of that. She's an amazing computer science professor. Guess that's where I got my love for coding. David's head snapped up. You code? A small smile played at Kevin's lips. Built my first app at 13. Nothing fancy, just a game. Mom helped. Pride and grief battled in David's chest. His son had followed in his footsteps without even knowing it. How many moments like this had he missed? I never stopped loving you, May said suddenly, then coughed. The sound was rough, worrying. But I'm not here for that. I'm here because she stopped, struggling for words. Mom's sick, Kevin finished for her, his voice cracking. Pancreatic cancer. We don't have much time. The world seemed to stop for a moment. David looked at May properly now, seeing what he'd missed earlier, the weight loss, the tiredness in her eyes, the slight tremor in her hands. The treatments are expensive, May admitted reluctantly. But that's not why we're here. Kevin needs family. He needs his father. I need to know he'll be okay when. She couldn't finish the sentence. David reached across the table, taking May's hand. It felt like bridging 2 decades in a single gesture. I missed 17 years, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I won't miss another day. Whatever you need, treatments, specialists, anything, it's yours. And Kevin, he turned to his son, seeing both the boy he was and the man he would become. I know I can't make up for lost time, but if you'll let me, I'd like to try. Kevin nodded, blinking back tears. Then, surprising them all, he pulled out his phone. Want to see my app? It's pretty basic, but... David smiled, his heart both breaking and healing at once. I'd love to. As Kevin began explaining his code, May watched them with a bittersweet smile. Outside, the sun was setting over San Francisco, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. It wasn't the ending she planned when she walked into that church this morning, but maybe it was the beginning their son needed. 3 days after the wedding that wasn't, David sat in his home office, staring at an envelope. The DNA test results had arrived faster than usual, being a billionaire had its perks. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it, though he already knew what it would say. One look at Kevin had been enough. The phone rang, displaying Sophia's name. He had been avoiding her calls, ashamed of how their perfect day had turned into a media circus. This time he answered. I saw the tabloid headlines, she said, skipping hello. Her voice was tired but steady. Tech billionaire's secret love child crashes wedding. Really, David? That's how you're handling this? I'm sorry, he whispered, clutching the test results. I never meant for any of this to happen. I know, Sophia sighed. That's why I'm here. Open your front door. David walked through his modern mansion, its emptiness suddenly striking him. He opened the door to find Sophia standing there, still beautiful but more casual than he'd ever seen her, in jeans and a simple blouse. I thought we should talk in person, she said, walking past him. And I want to meet him, properly this time. Before David could respond, his phone buzzed with a text from Kevin. Can't we talk? I'm at the coffee shop near your office. Sophia read the message over his shoulder. Perfect timing. Let's go. 20 minutes later, they walked into the coffee shop. Kevin sat at a corner table, hunched over a laptop, looking so much like David in his college days that it made his heart skip. A half-empty cup of hot chocolate sat beside him. You must be Kevin, Sophia said warmly, sliding into the seat across from him. I'm sorry we didn't get properly introduced at the event. Kevin looked up, surprised but relieved. Hi. I'm sorry about ruining your wedding. You didn't ruin anything, Sophia said firmly. Life just got a little more complicated. May I? She gestured at his laptop screen. Oh, sure. Kevin turned the laptop around. I'm working on a new app. It helps connect kids with rare medical conditions to support groups and resources. David, who had been quietly watching, felt pride swell in his chest. That's incredible, Kevin. How did you come up with the idea? Mom's oncologist mentioned how hard it is for families to find support when dealing with rare conditions. Kevin's voice got quieter. I thought maybe I could help. Sophia studied the code on the screen. This is impressive. You know, David's company has a foundation that funds medical technology projects. Really? Kevin's eyes lit up, then dimmed. But I don't want special treatment just because. Because you're my son. David placed the DNA test results on the table. It's official, by the way. Though he didn't need this to know. Kevin stared at the paper but didn't touch it. Mom said you'd probably want proof. May was trying to protect you, Sophia said gently. Both of you, actually. She made sure you knew about your father's achievements, and now she's making sure your father knows about yours. A tear slipped down Kevin's cheek. He quickly wiped it away. The doctors say she has maybe 6 months. She's trying to fit in 20 years of mother-son moments into half a year. David reached across the table, placing his hand over his son's. We'll get her the best care available. And those mother-son moments? We'll record them all. Every single one. And maybe, Sophia added softly, we can start creating some father-son moments too. Kevin looked at her, confused. You're not angry. Life rarely goes as planned, she replied, smiling slightly. Sometimes it goes better. You're out, for instance. It's exactly the kind of project our foundation looks for. Not because you're David's son, but because it's genuinely good work. Would you? David cleared his throat. Would you like to come see the foundation? Meet the team. No pressure, just if you're interested. Kevin's eyes lit up again, this time staying bright. Could Mom come too? When she's feeling up to it, she always wanted to see where you worked. Of course, David said, his voice thick with emotion. We'll give you both the full tour. As they talked about coding and apps and future plans, the afternoon sun warmed the coffee shop. Outside, a few paparazzi lingered with their cameras, but inside, something new was taking shape. Not the family any of them had planned for, but maybe something even better. A family built on understanding, second chances, and love that had waited 20 years to bloom. The morning news blared from every TV screen in David's corporate office. Tech Vision CEO's secret son. The story that's shaking Silicon Valley. Stock prices flashed red across the ticker tape, showing a 15% drop since the wedding revelation. David's phone hadn't stopped buzzing with calls from board members and investors. Turn it off, he muttered to his assistant, rubbing his temples. The headlines were getting more sensational by the hour. Some claimed May was running a scam. Others painted David as an absent father who'd known all along. None of them came close to the truth. His office door burst open as his mother, Linda Chen, strode in wearing her signature pearl necklace and a disapproving frown. This needs to stop, David. The board is threatening to call an emergency meeting. Your company's reputation. is less important than my son, David finished firmly, standing up. Mom, I know you're worried about the family name, but Kevin is family. A family we knew nothing about for 17 years. Linda's voice cracked. How do we know this woman isn't after your money? The timing. I've seen the medical bills, Mom. David's voice softened. May didn't want money. She wanted Kevin to have a father after she. He couldn't finish the sentence. A notification popped up on his phone. A news alert about Kevin. Someone had dug up his school records, his social media accounts. There were photos of him leaving his high school, trying to shield his face from cameras. David's blood boiled. He's 17. They're harassing a minor. Linda's expression softened slightly. The boy does look exactly like you at that age. His name is Kevin, David said quietly, and he's brilliant, Mom. He's developing an app to help families dealing with serious illnesses. He did that before he even knew about my company, before any of this. Before Linda could respond, Sophia walked in, carrying takeout bags. She'd been a constant support over the past week, helping navigate the media circus with grace. I brought lunch, she announced. And Kevin's downstairs. The press followed him from school again. David was already heading for the elevator. He found Kevin in the lobby, surrounded by security guards. His son's school backpack was clutched tight against his chest, his face pale but determined. I'm sorry, Kevin said as soon as he saw David. I didn't know where else to go. They were waiting outside school, asking about Mom's health, about you. Don't apologize. David put an arm around Kevin's shoulders, leading him to the private elevator. You can always come here. Always. Upstairs, they found Sophia had set out lunch on the conference room table. Linda stood awkwardly by the window, studying Kevin with new eyes. You know, she said slowly, your father used to carry his backpack the same way. Always hugged it close, like he was protecting his precious computer inside. Kevin blinked in surprise. I have my laptop in here. I was working on my app during lunch break. A ghost of a smile crossed Linda's face. Would you show me this app of yours? As Kevin pulled out his laptop, explaining his project with growing confidence, David watched his mother's expression change. The business concerns, the family reputation, they all took a backseat to the simple truth before her. This was her grandson, a boy who shared not just David's looks, but his passion for using technology to help others. Sophia slipped her hand into David's. Your PR team is waiting outside. They want to discuss damage control. Let them wait, David said, watching Kevin and his mother bond over lines of code. Some things are more important than stock prices. Just then, David's phone rang. Me's number. His heart stopped when he saw Kevin's face fall as he answered. The doctors want to move up her treatment schedule, May said, her voice weaker than before. For cancer, it's spreading faster than they thought. The world seemed to freeze. Kevin was already packing up his laptop, reading the situation on his father's face. Linda stepped forward, surprising everyone by taking charge. I'll have my driver take us to the hospital, she announced. Family stays together in times like this. As they rushed out, David caught sight of another news headline. Tech billionaire neglects company for love child drama. He smiled grimly. They had no idea what real drama was or what real love could do. In the elevator, Kevin looked up at his father. The media's hurting your company because of me. Companies can recover, David said firmly. Time with family, that's irreplaceable. The cameras were waiting outside, but this time, the Chen family walked out together, heads held high. Let them take their pictures, David thought. Let them see what really mattered, not the scandal, not the stock prices, but a family finding its way back to each other, one difficult step at a time. The hospital waiting room had become their second home over the past few weeks. David sat beside Kevin, watching his son type furiously on his laptop, dark circles under his eyes matching his father's. They were both running on coffee and determination. Look at this, Kevin said, turning his screen. I added a feature that helps families find clinical trials near them. Mom helped me with the algorithm before. His voice trailed off. Mai had been moved to intensive care 2 days ago. David leaned closer, examining the code. This is impressive. You're using machine learning to match patient profiles with trial requirements. Yeah, Mom said it was too ambitious, but she helped anyway. Kevin smiled weakly. She taught computer science until last month, you know. Her students sent all these cards. A nurse approached them, clipboard in hand. Mr. Chen, your wife is here with Ms. Wang's test results. Sophia had taken charge of coordinating with May's medical team, showing a side of herself that amazed David daily. They found her in May's room, holding her old college rival's hand as the doctor explained the latest scan results. The sight made David's throat tight. The new treatment isn't working as well as we hoped, May said softly when she saw them. Despite everything, she still had that fierce look in her eyes, the same one David remembered from their college days when she refused to give up on a difficult coding problem. Kevin moved to his mother's side instantly, but David noticed how his son stood taller now, trying to be strong. 3 weeks of facing cameras and whispers had given him a different kind of strength. I heard you got the foundation grant, May said, smiling at Kevin. Your father's company is going to help develop your app. Actually, David stepped forward. Kevin got it on his own merit. The review board didn't even know he was my son. They were impressed by his coding and the project's potential impact. Sophia nodded. He presented it himself last week. You should have seen him, May. He has David's way with words and your determination. A tear slipped down May's cheek. I always knew you'd do amazing things, Kevin, even before you knew who your father was. Mom, don't talk like. Kevin's voice cracked. Like I'm saying goodbye? May squeezed his hand. I'm not. Not yet. But I need you both to listen. She looked between David and Kevin. I see you trying so hard to make up for lost time. Stop. Don't waste energy on regret. Just be here now. David pulled up a chair. Tell us about Kevin's first coding project. I want to hear everything. For the next hour, May shared stories. Kevin's first computer, built from parts he'd saved up for by mowing lawns. His determination to learn Java because his mom used it in her classes. The science fair project that won first place, a simple program that helped his classmate with dyslexia read better. He was always like you, May told David. Always wanting to help people through technology. I used to show him articles about Tech Vision's charitable initiatives. He never knew they were his father's work, but he wanted to do the same thing. Sophia quietly excused herself, giving them privacy. Through the window, they could see reporters still camped outside the hospital. But in here, time seemed to move differently. David, May said suddenly, show Kevin the secret to debugging nested loops. The trick you figured out in college. Mom, you don't have to, Kevin started. I want to see this, she insisted. I want to see you two work together, just once. David pulled his chair closer to Kevin's laptop. As they began working through the code together, May watched with a peaceful smile. Father and son lost track of time, engrossed in problem-solving, their hands moving in similar gestures as they discussed algorithms. That's it, May whispered, but nobody heard her. She was content watching the two people she loved most in the world finally connecting over what they both loved best. Later that evening, as Kevin dozed in a chair, David noticed May watching them both. Thank you, she said softly, for loving him so quickly. How could I not? David replied. He's the best of both of us. Outside, the sun was setting over the city. In the hospital room, a father and son had found each other through lines of code and shared dreams, while a mother who had kept a secret for 17 years finally saw her two worlds merge into one. It wasn't the family any of them had imagined, but it was theirs, and it was real. The autumn breeze rustled through the private garden of the Chen family estate. David had moved May here last week against the hospital's initial protests. Money and influence had their uses, especially when it came to giving someone their final wishes. Kevin sat cross-legged on the grass beside his mother's wheelchair, his laptop balanced on his knees. He was showing her the latest version of his app, now being tested in 3 major hospitals. May's smile was tired but proud as she watched her son explain each new feature. The support group matching system is working better than we expected, Kevin said, his voice stronger these days. A family in Boston found help for their daughter's rare condition through it yesterday. That's wonderful, sweetheart. May's voice was barely a whisper now, but her eyes were bright. She turned to David, who stood nearby. He gets that from you, you know. That need to help others through innovation. David shook his head, moving closer. No, that's all you, May. You're the one who taught computer science to help students find their path. You're the one who raised him to think about others. Sophia appeared from the house, carrying a tray with tea and medications. Over the past month, she had become not just David's support, but May's friend, an unexpected blessing in this storm of changes. The doctors are coming for their evening check, Sophia said gently. And Kevin, your grandmother wants to show you something in her study. Linda had surprised everyone by becoming Kevin's fiercest advocate. She'd been teaching him about the family history, showing him old photos, telling stories about David's childhood. It was her way of making up for lost time. As Kevin reluctantly headed inside, David helped May with her tea. Her hands shook too much these days to hold the cup steady. I need you to promise me something, May said once they were alone. Both of you. Sophia sat down beside them, her hand finding David's. Don't let Kevin put his life on hold because of grief, May continued. He'll want to. He'll throw himself into his work, just like his father used to do. She gave David a knowing look. Help him remember to live. We will, Sophia promised. And we'll record everything, every achievement, every milestone. We'll keep a journal of stories about you for him. May smiled. You're good for them both, Sophia. I'm glad he found you. She paused, gathering strength. David, there's a letter in my room. For Kevin's wedding day, whenever that comes. And one for his college graduation. And we'll make sure he gets them all, David assured her, his voice thick with emotion. And we'll tell him stories about his brilliant mother who taught computer science and raised an amazing son and never stopped believing in people's potential. I have one more favor, May said, her voice growing fainter. The app? Help him finish it. Not because he's your son, but because it matters. Because it will help people. I already have the development team working on scaling it up, David said. Kevin's going to lead the project himself once. He couldn't finish the sentence. Inside the house, they could hear Kevin laughing at something Linda had said. The sound drifted out to the garden, making May smile. I'm so afraid, she admitted, not of dying, but of leaving him alone. Now I know he won't be. Sophia wiped away a tear. He has a whole family now. And we'll make sure he knows how much his mother loved him every single day. The evening light turned golden, casting long shadows across the garden. A cool breeze carried the scent of autumn flowers, the ones Kevin had planted when they moved May here, insisting she should have her favorite blooms around her. You know what I regret? May asked suddenly. Not seeing you two get married. You deserve that happiness. We'll have a small ceremony, Sophia said, something private with family. And we'll have a photo of you there, right beside us. And I'll make sure Kevin wears a proper tie this time, David added, making May laugh softly. The sound of footsteps announced Kevin's return. He carried an old photo album Linda had given him, his eyes bright with discovered memories. Mom, look. Grandma found pictures of you and Dad from college. There's one from that coding competition you both won. As Kevin settled back beside his mother's wheelchair, sharing his discoveries, David and Sophia exchanged glances. This wasn't the family any of them had pictured, but it was real and precious and somehow perfect in its imperfection. The doctors would arrive soon, with their charts and concerned faces. But for now, in this peaceful garden, 4 people who had been strangers just months ago sat together, sharing memories, building bridges between past and future, and proving that sometimes the most beautiful things grow from life's biggest surprises. 1 year later, the garden where May had spent her final days bloomed with fresh flowers. Kevin stood before the mirror in his father's study, struggling with his tie. Today was different from that chaos-filled day at the cathedral a year ago. Today, he was ready to stand beside his father as best man. Here, let me help, David said, stepping into the room. He looked different now, lighter somehow, despite everything they'd been through. Your mom was always better at these than me. She used to fix my tie before every investor meeting. Kevin smiled, remembering the letters they'd found after Mai passed. She'd written hundreds, each marked for different moments in Kevin's life. Today's envelope had read, "For your father's wedding day." Have you read it yet? David asked softly, straightening Kevin's tie. Not yet. I was waiting until we were both here. Kevin pulled the envelope from his pocket. The paper was thick, cream-colored. Mai had chosen special stationery for these final messages. Together, father and son sat in the leather chairs by the window. Kevin's hands shook slightly as he opened the letter. "My dearest Kevin and David," he read aloud. "If you're reading this, it means you're both getting ready for a new chapter. David, you're finally marrying the wonderful woman who accepted not just you, but our complicated story. Kevin, you're standing by your father's side, where you always belonged." David wiped his eyes as Kevin continued reading. "I want you both to know that my greatest joy was seeing you find each other. Kevin, your father isn't perfect. He works too hard, forgets to eat lunch, and still can't make proper coffee. But he loves with his whole heart. David, our son is stubborn, stays up too late coding, and worries too much about others, just like you. Love these things about each other." Through the window, they could see guests arriving in the garden. This time, there were no reporters, no cameras, just family and close friends. Sophia had arranged everything perfectly, including a special chair in the front row, empty except for a single white rose, May's favorite. "The app launches next week," Kevin said, carefully folding the letter. "The medical board approved it for nationwide use. Mom would have loved to see that." "She did see it," David replied. "She saw it in your determination, in every line of code you wrote. Speaking of which," he pulled out a small box. "This was your mom's idea." Inside was a pair of cufflinks, each engraved with a line of code, the first program May and David had written together in college. "She had these made months ago," David explained. "Asked Sophia to give them to us today, one for each of us." Kevin fastened his cufflink, matching his father's movement. In the garden below, he could see his grandmother Linda arranging flowers, fussing over every detail. She'd thrown herself into wedding planning with the same energy she'd once used to resist their new family dynamic. "Mr. Chen?" Sophia's assistant poked her head in. "It's time." The garden ceremony was everything the cathedral event wasn't: intimate, peaceful, joyful. Kevin watched his father's face as Sophia walked down the aisle, her simple white dress catching the sunlight. The empty chair with its white rose seemed to glow. When it came time for the best man speech, Kevin pulled out his phone. "I modified my app one last time," he said. "Added a special feature Mom helped me design before." He touched the screen, and suddenly the garden filled with soft music, a piece Matt used to play when Kevin was young. "Mom believed technology could bring people together," Kevin continued, his voice steady. "She kept that belief when she was teaching, when she was sick, and even when she was writing letters for us to find after she was gone. So Dad, Sophia, this is Mom's wedding gift to you." The app's screen displayed a collection of photos and videos: May and David in college, Kevin growing up, the chaos of the first wedding, hospital moments, garden memories, and finally, a video message Mai had recorded just weeks before she passed. "Love isn't about perfect timing," May's voice filled the garden. "It's about perfect hearts finding each other, no matter how long it takes. David and Sophia, you found each other. Kevin, you found your father. And I found peace knowing my two favorite people in the world will always have each other." There wasn't a dry eye in the garden. David pulled Kevin into a tight hug as Sophia joined them, that hand finding the white rose in May's chair. Later that evening, as the celebration continued under twinkling lights, Kevin stood at the edge of the garden. His phone buzzed with a notification. Another family had found help through his app. He smiled, thinking of his mother's words about technology bringing people together. "Hey," David called. "Your grandmother's looking for you. Something about embarrassing baby pictures she wants to show Sophia's family." Kevin laughed, tucking away his phone. The past year had brought pain and healing, endings and beginnings. But most importantly, it had brought them here, to this garden, to this moment, to this family that was perfectly imperfect. As father and son walked back to the celebration, the white rose in May's chair caught the last rays of sunlight, glowing like a promise kept, like love that transcends time, like a story that didn't end sadly, but simply began again in a different way.